I found it because I straightened a pillow. That's the whole beginning of it, the smallest thing, the kind of thing you do without thinking 100 times a night. I was on the late watch in the children's wing, and I went through the princess's room the way we did, quiet, just a look, just making sure, and the pillow on her bed had slid half off and I reached down to set it right. Because that's a thing you do. You tidy a child's bed without thinking, and under it was the envelope. Black, that's the first wrong thing. Envelopes aren't black. Letters in a palace come on cream, on white, on the good paper with the seals, and this was black paper. The kind of thing that costs more to make than ordinary paper and exists for no reason except to be black, to be wrong, to make your stomach drop the way mine dropped. On a child's bed, under a child's pillow, in the dark, on the late watch. My name is Talon. I was a guard of the night watch, Kingdom of Corvith, posted to the children's wing, which is the post they give you when they trust you, and when they've decided you're past the age for anything more dangerous than walking quiet halls and tidying the occasional pillow. I'd had the post 3 years. Nothing had ever happened on it. Nothing happens in the children's wing. That's the whole point of the children's wing. It's the safest place in the safest part of the palace, which is exactly why what I found there frightened me more than anything ever frightened me on a wall or at a gate. Because a threat at a gate is where threats belong, and a black envelope under a sleeping child's pillow is a threat that has gotten all the way inside, past every wall and gate and guard, to the very last and softest place, and is lying there in the dark, an inch from her head. The princess was asleep. Rena, 6 years old. She slept the way small children sleep, all the way under, one arm flung out, her breathing the deep, even breathing of a child who has no idea the world has teeth. And under her pillow, an inch from that sleeping head, a black envelope that should not exist, that no one should have been able to place there. That meant someone had been in this room, at this bed, over this child, and had reached under her pillow while she slept and left a thing the color of the worst news there is. I'm an old man telling this now, and I've kept it close for a lifetime, so let me say at the start why I'm finally letting it out. It's because of how the story would be told without me. A guard found a terrifying message under a princess's pillow. You can hear how that wants to go, can't you, toward villains and plots and a brave guard foiling a dark conspiracy, the kind of tale that thrills and means nothing. And the truth is the opposite of that tale in every way that matters, smaller and sadder, and far more important, and I'm the only one left who knows it whole, and I won't let the thrilling lie be the only version that survives me. So I'm setting down the true one, the quiet one, the one with no villain in it and a lonely child at the bottom of it, because the true one might actually help someone, might make some guard or some parent or some person who finds a strange, frightening thing from a child stop and look again before they reach for the alarm. The thrilling version helps no one. The true version might save a child. So here's the true one. It starts, as I said, with a pillow I straightened without thinking, on an ordinary late watch in the safest wing of the palace, where nothing ever happened, where the worst thing I ever found was waiting under a sleeping child's head. I took it. I shouldn't have. Maybe the proper thing, the trained thing, is to touch nothing, raise the alarm, let it be handled. But my hands took it before my training could speak, the way hands do, and I stood there in the dark with a black envelope in my hand and a sleeping child an arm's length away and my heart going like a drum, and I made the first of the choices I'd second guess for the rest of my life. I didn't raise the alarm. Not yet. I took the envelope out into the corridor, into the torchlight, to see what it was first, because some animal part of me knew that an alarm in the children's wing in the dark would wake the child, would frighten her, would bring the whole machine of the palace down on a 6-year-old's bedroom, and I wanted to know what I was bringing down on her before I brought it. So I stepped into the corridor and I opened the envelope. The paper inside was black too, and the writing was in something pale, silver, or white ink or chalk, pale on the black so it seemed to float, and I had to hold it to the torch to read it, and when I read it the corridor went cold around me in a way that had nothing to do with the stone. I'm not going to give you the exact words. I've never given anyone the exact words, and I won't start now, partly because they were a child's age 6 and they should stay hers, and partly because the exact words aren't the point. The point is what they did to me standing in that corridor, which was to stop my heart. It was a threat. That's the plain reading, the reading I took in that first cold moment, the reading anyone would take. It was a message of harm, of watching, of a thing coming for the princess, written in pale ink on black paper and slid under a sleeping child's pillow. It said, in the way these things say, I can reach you. I am close. Something terrible is coming. Read one way, the way I read it, the way fear reads everything. It was the most frightening thing I had ever held, because it was proof that someone could reach all the way to a child's pillow and wanted her to know it. I stood in that corridor and I made the second choice. I should have raised the alarm then with the proof in my hand. I didn't. I'll explain why as I go, because the why is the whole story, but the short of it is, something was wrong about it, even in that first cold moment, something my fear couldn't name but my watching could, some small detail off, and a guard who's watched long enough learns to trust the off feeling even when he can't say what it is. Something about the envelope was wrong in a way that a kidnapper's threat wouldn't be wrong. I didn't know what yet. But the off feeling stayed my hand on the alarm cord, and instead of raising the whole palace, I decided to do the thing I'd regret and be grateful for in equal measure. I decided to find out who left it myself, quietly first. Let me tell you why I didn't just raise the alarm, because you'll think me mad or worse. A guard who finds a threat to a princess and investigates it himself instead of bringing the weight of the crown down on it. Part of it was the off feeling. I'll come back to that. But part of it was that I knew what raising the alarm would do, and I'd seen it before in other matters, and I dreaded it. Raise the alarm over a threat to the princess, and the machine wakes up, and the machine is not gentle, and the machine is not interested in the child. The machine is interested in the threat, in catching it, in being seen to respond to it, and the child becomes the setting for the response rather than its point. They'd move her to a secure room, away from her own bed, her own things in the dark, frightened, not understanding. They'd question everyone, the servants, the nurses, with the hard questioning the crown uses when a royal's been threatened, and good people would be hurt by it, frightened. Some may be broken, because the machine doesn't care whose life it cracks to find a thread. They'd seal the wing, double the guard, turn the safest, softest place in the palace into a fortress with a frightened child at the center of it. And all of that might be necessary if the threat were real, if it were an outside thing, a kidnapper, a faction. Then all of that and more would be right, and I'd be a fool and a criminal for delaying it. But the off feeling said, wait, look first. Because if I was wrong about the threat being what it looked like, and the off feeling whispered that I was, then raising the alarm would bring all that machinery down on the wing, on the child, on the servants, for nothing, or worse than nothing. So I gambled. I gambled the worst gamble a guard can make, the gamble with a child's safety as the stake, that I could find out what this envelope really was fast, quietly, before the night was out, and raise the alarm in the morning if I was wrong, having lost only a few hours, or save everyone the machine if I was right. It was not my gamble to make. I know that. I made it anyway. The off feeling and the dread of the machine and 3 years of loving that quiet wing and the children in it made me make it. And I'll answer for it the rest of my life. And I'd make it again, because the off feeling was right. I went looking for who left the envelope. And the looking taught me the palace I'd guarded for 3 years was full of doors I'd never seen. Why I understood. Because a man doesn't read a lonely child's cry unless he's known the cold himself. You'll have wondered how I came to read the envelope right when my whole training pointed me wrong, how the off feeling knew before I did that the threat was something sadder than a threat. I'll tell you, because it's the understory, the thing beneath the thing. I was a lonely child myself, not a princess in a palace, the other end of it entirely. A poor child in a poor house, but loneliness doesn't care about your station. Loneliness is the same cold in a hovel as in a palace, the same particular ache of being a child whom the busy world is too busy to come to. My mother died young and my father worked himself half to death keeping us fed, and he loved me. I never doubted he loved me, but he was always gone, always working, always too tired when he was home to do more than make sure I was fed and breathing. And I learned the thing Rena learned, the thing all the safely not come to children learn, that being fine, being fed, being safe, is exactly the condition under which the world feels free to not come to you. I learned to be no trouble. And being no trouble is the loneliest thing a child can be, because trouble at least brings someone, and no trouble brings no one. And a no-trouble child sits in a kind of silence that the well-meaning adults around him mistake for contentment. I never wrote a black envelope, but I understand the impulse all the way to the bone, because I had it, the longing to do something, be something, that would make the busy world stop and come, and the slow, terrible learning that my ordinary self, my fine, no-trouble self, was not enough to summon anyone. I used to get sick, really sick, but also, I think, a little willingly sick, the body learning that sickness brought my father to my bedside the way nothing else did, that being ill was the one reliable way to make him stop and come and put his rough hand on my forehead. I didn't manufacture it the way Rena manufactured her threats. I wasn't that clever or that desperate, but the machinery was the same. A child discovering that his danger summons the love his ordinary need can't, and the body learning to reach for the danger. So when I stood in that corridor with the black envelope, and the off feeling whispered that this was not what it looked like, the off feeling was my own childhood, recognizing itself, smelling its own old cold coming off that black paper. I read the envelope right because I'd half written it myself, 40 years before, in a poor house, in the silence of being no trouble. The princess and I, a world apart in everything, were the same child underneath, and the same child recognized her, and that recognition was the off feeling, and the off feeling saved her, because it kept me from handing her cry for help to the machine that would have called it a sickness. The wing I loved, the safe, quiet place, and the blindness that safety breeds. I want to say something about the wing, the children's wing, because I loved it and my love for it was part of my blindness, and a man should own his blindness. I'd been proud of that post. I told you it's the post they give you when they trust you, and I'd taken it as the honor it was meant to be, the safe, quiet wing, the children, the sense that I was guarding the most precious and most protected hearts of the kingdom. And I'd let the safety of it lull me, the way safety lulls everyone. 3 years of nothing ever happening had taught me that nothing ever happened, and I'd come to guard the wing against the only threats I could imagine, which were outside threats, the intruder, the kidnapper, the thing from the world. I watched the doors and the windows and the ways in. I never once thought to watch for the threat that grows inside a safe, quiet place precisely because it's safe and quiet, the loneliness, the unmetness, the slow harm that comes not from danger but from the absence of presence. I was guarding against everything that might come to harm the children and blind to the harm that was already happening to one of them, in plain sight, in the safety itself, because the safety was the thing hurting her, the smooth, well-run safety that met her every need except the one that mattered. That's the lesson the wing taught me, the bitter one under the tender one. We guard against the dramatic threat and miss the quiet one. We build walls against the kidnapper and never notice the child going lonely inside the walls. The safe, quiet places are exactly where the quiet harms grow, because everyone's attention, including the guards, is pointed outward at the dangers that never come, and no one's watching the slow inward harm of a child who is safe and provided for and utterly unmet. I guarded that wing for 3 years against threats from the world, and the real threat was loneliness, and I never saw it until it wrote me a letter in black, and even then I almost mistook it for the kind of threat I knew how to fight. We are all of us, I think, better at guarding against the loud dangers than the quiet ones, and the quiet ones do more harm in the end, and a black envelope under a pillow taught me that, too late to be proud of, in time to matter to one child, which is the most any of us gets. The reading, again, the first cold moment slowed, because the fear was real even though the threat wasn't. I want to go back to the corridor, the first moment, the reading of the message, and slow it down, because I've told you it frightened me and I owe you the actual shape of the fear, since the fear is what nearly led me wrong. Standing in the torchlight with the black paper and the pale floating words, the first thing the fear did was make everything mean the worst. That's what fear does to a reader. It takes ambiguous marks and reads them all the darkest way. The words could have meant several things. Fear chose the most terrible meaning for each, assembled them into the most terrible whole, and presented me with a kidnapper's threat, a watcher's promise, a coming harm. And the fear had evidence, or what felt like evidence. The black paper, the secret placing, the reaching under a sleeping child's pillow of it, all of which fear read as the signs of a sophisticated enemy, a faction, a plot. My body believed it utterly. My heart hammered. My hands went cold. Every instinct screamed threat, enemy, alarm, and if I'd acted on the screaming, I'd have been wrong in the most consequential possible way. But under the screaming, quiet, almost drowned out, was the off feeling, and I have to honor the off feeling because it's the hero of this story more than I am. The off feeling noticed things the fear was too loud to notice. It noticed that the paper, black and costly seeming, was actually crewed up close, hand darkened, made not bought. A real faction has real black paper, doesn't hand smear ordinary paper dark. It noticed that the pale writing, meant to float and terrify, was unsteady, was effortful in a way a practiced hand isn't, was trying too hard to be frightening. The way a thing tries too hard only when the one making it isn't naturally frightening and is reaching for an effect beyond them. It noticed, though I couldn't have said it then, that the whole envelope had the quality of something performed, something costumed, a threat wearing a threat's clothes rather than a threat being itself. The off feeling noticed all of this in the first cold moment and couldn't make it into words, could only make it into the feeling, the weight, the don't raise the alarm yet, the something's not right about this. And I trusted the feeling over the screaming barely by a hair, and the hair was the whole difference. The hair was the child's whole future. If the screaming had won, I'd have raised the alarm and the machine would have come and the truth would have been found by the machine and turned into a managing, and the child would have been worse, not better, for being saved. The off feeling won by a hair. I've thanked it every day since. It was my own old loneliness, I told you, recognizing hers under the costume of threat, and it was quieter than the fear and truer than the fear, and the lesson of my whole life is in that hair's breadth. Trust the quiet true feeling over the loud frightened one, even when the loud one has all the evidence, because the loud one is reading everything its own dark way, and the quiet one is actually seeing. The first question of any investigation is the simplest and the hardest. How did it get there? Not who, not why, not yet how. How did a black envelope get under the pillow of a princess in the most guarded wing of the palace, past me, past the day watch, past the nurses, into a locked routine that I knew better than anyone because I'd walked it 1,000 nights? I started with the door. The princess's room has one door, and that door was watched by me, on the late watch, and by the day watch before me, and there'd been no break in the watch, no gap, no moment the door was unguarded that I could find when I went back through the evening in my head. Which meant the envelope didn't come through the door. Which meant, and this is the thought that turned my investigation from a search for an intruder into something stranger, which meant it came another way, and the only other ways into a sealed room in an old palace are the ways the palace doesn't admit it has. The secret passages. Every old palace has them, and Corvith's was older than most, and I knew, the way the guards know, that the walls were full of ways, old servants' runs, escape routes built for sieges long over, the hidden veins of a building that's been added to and walled up and rebuilt for centuries until it's more passage than wall in places. I knew they existed. I'd never had cause to use them, never been taught their map, because the map of the secret ways is held close, given only to a few, on the principle that a secret way known to everyone is no longer secret and no longer safe. But I knew the children's wing was old, was part of the original keep, and that if there was a way into that sealed room, it would be through the old bones of the place. And so, I spent the dark hours of that first night doing the thing no night watch guard is supposed to do. I left my post quietly, and I went looking for a door in a wall that wasn't supposed to have one. I found it near dawn, and finding it frightened me worse than the envelope had. Behind a tapestry in the small antechamber off the princess's room, a tapestry I'd walked past 1,000 times, a dull old hunting scene no one looked at, there was a seam in the paneling, and the seam was a door, and the door was not locked, and it opened onto a passage, narrow, black, breathing the cold, stale air of a space that's been sealed from the living world. And the dust on the floor of that passage was disturbed. Recently. Small footprints, not a grown intruder's boots. That's the thing, not the prints I was braced for, but small ones, and going both ways, in and out, more than once. A pattern of coming and going that had been happening for longer than one night. I stood at the mouth of that passage with my torch and my dropping stomach, and I rearranged my whole understanding of what I was investigating. Because small footprints, coming and going repeatedly over time, through a secret door into a princess's room, that's not a kidnapper. A kidnapper comes once, does the thing, leaves. This was someone small who'd found a way in and used it again and again, who knew the passage, who came and went like it was theirs. My mind, still braced for a threat, built the wrong story first. A child accomplice, maybe. A small servant's child used the way the small are always used, sent through the passages by the people who can't fit or won't risk it. The way another child in another tale I once heard was sent up a back stair with poison. I built that story and started down the passage believing it, hunting a small accomplice and the grown hands behind them. The passage went where I should have known it would go if I hadn't been so braced for villains. It didn't go out to some exterior wall some way in from the world. It went deeper in. It connected, I followed it, crouching the cold stone close around me, the torch throwing mad shadows. It connected to other passages, a whole hidden map of the old keep, and I understood that whoever the small feet belonged to, they hadn't come in from outside. They lived inside. They were already in the palace. The threat, if it was a threat, wasn't reaching in from the world. It was already here, small, moving through the walls, and the walls connected everything, the whole children's wing and beyond, and a small person who knew this map could go almost anywhere unseen, could reach almost any room, could be almost anyone's small invisible servant, or could be something else entirely that I hadn't let myself think yet. I want to tell you about the suspects, because I had them, I built them, and the building of them is part of how wrong fear can lead you. By the second night I had a list. That's what investigation does, it makes lists, and fear fills the lists with the people it's already afraid of. There was a new understeward, hired that season, a quiet, watchful man I'd never warmed to. Fear loves the unwarmed to, the unfamiliar, and I had him near the top, building a story where the new man had found the passages and was using some small accomplice to terrorize the princess for some faction's purpose. There was a nurse who'd been dismissed and rehired, who'd had a grievance, who fear whispered might have cause to frighten the household. There was a kitchen family with a child the right size for the footprints, and I watched that child, God forgive me, watched a kitchen child for 2 days believing it might be the small hand in the passages, the way the palace had taught me to suspect the small and the poor first. I was wrong about all of them. Every suspect on my fears list was innocent, and I'd have hurt them, some of them, if I'd raised the alarm with their names in my mouth. The new understeward would have been broken by the questioning, the dismissed nurse hanged perhaps on nothing, the kitchen child's family destroyed. My fear built a conspiracy out of the people it already distrusted, the way fear always does, the way the machine always does, and if I'd fed that conspiracy to the machine it would have chewed up a half-dozen innocent lives and never once found the truth. Because the truth wasn't a conspiracy. The truth had no villain at all. The truth was the one thing my fear-built list could never have held. Because fear can't imagine the answer that isn't a villain. The small feet kept coming and going. The second night I found a second envelope. Not under the pillow this time, but in the passage itself, dropped, half-finished. And finding it half-finished was the first crack in my whole wrong story. Because a conspiracy doesn't drop half-finished threats in passages. A conspiracy is careful, and this was not careful. This was something messier and more human. A half-made black envelope abandoned in a cold passage like a thing a frightened person had started and lost their nerve at. I picked it up. The pale ink the same hand. And the hand, I looked at it properly for the first time in the torchlight in the passage, the actual letters. The hand was a child's. Not a child's message written by an adult to seem innocent. A child's actual writing. Carefully done, trying to look frightening, trying to look grown and terrible. The way a child trying to write a scary thing writes it. And failing at the frightening in a way that, once I saw it, broke my heart before I even understood why. The hand was a child's, and the passages went inward, not out, and the small feet came and went like they belonged. I stood in the cold passage with the half-finished envelope, and I felt the whole investigation turn over, felt the threat I'd been hunting dissolve and something far sadder start to take its shape in the dark. And I didn't want to follow it. Suddenly, didn't want to reach the end of this trail, because I'd begun to feel where it led, and where it led was worse than a villain, where it led was a child. The first night, longer, the passages, and what it is to crawl through the bones of a palace alone. I gave you the first night fast, the door behind the tapestry, the disturbed dust, the small prints. Let me give it to you slow, because crawling alone through the secret veins of an old keep at 3 in the morning, chasing a thing you can't name is a particular experience, and you should have it whole. The passage behind the tapestry was barely wide enough for a grown man, and I'm not a small one, and I had to go sideways in places, my breastplate scraping stone, the torch held awkward, the flame guttering in the dead air. The cold of it, not the clean cold of outside, but the old cold of a space sealed from the living, the cold of stone that hasn't felt sun or warmth in centuries, the cold that gets into your chest. And the smell, dust and the particular mineral smell of deep old stone, and under it something else faint that I couldn't place at first and then could, with a lurch, the faint smell of a child. The milk and wool smell, the sweet smell, the smell of the wings' small inhabitants here in the passage, where no child should be, telling me before my mind would accept it that the small feet were exactly as small as they looked. And the dread of it crawling alone. Because I still believed that first night that I was hunting a threat, and a threat in a passage is the worst place to meet one, close, dark, no room to fight, no help, no way to call for it. Every yard I went deeper, I was more alone and more committed and less able to turn back, and the torch made the shadows leap, and twice I stopped, certain I'd heard something ahead, small sounds, scuffs, the sounds I'd later understand were a child moving through her secret kingdom, but that I then heard as the enemy, and my heart went like a drum and my hand went to my sword in a space too narrow to draw it. That's the thing about hunting the wrong story. The fear is just as real as if the story were true. I was as frightened crawling toward a lonely 6-year-old as I'd have been crawling toward an assassin, because I didn't know yet which I was crawling toward, and fear doesn't wait for facts. Fear fills the dark with whatever it's already carrying. I carried assassins. So the passages were full of assassins. For me, that first night, though they held only a lonely child, and I crawled through my own fear's monsters toward a thing that turned out to need holding, not fighting. And I'll never forget the strange shame of that later, that I'd gone armed and dreading through the dark toward a child, that my whole trained self had prepared to meet a killer and met instead a small, lonely girl, and that the preparing had nearly made me unable to see her rightly when I found her. The second night, the suspects, the watching, the wrongness of suspecting the innocent. The second night was the night of the suspects, and I have to dwell on it, because it's the night I came closest to doing real harm, and the near harm is part of the lesson. I told you I had a list. Let me tell you what it's like to watch innocent people with a suspicious eye, because it's an ugly thing and I did it and I won't pretend I didn't. I watched the new understeward all that second day, before the night watch, followed him in my off hours, noted his movements, built his guilt out of nothing but my own unease and his unfamiliarity. He did nothing. He was a man doing his work, a careful, quiet man new to a hard place, and I watched him the way you watch a guilty man, and every innocent thing he did I fitted into my story of his guilt, because that's what suspicion does. It reads innocence as cunning. It turns a man's ordinary day into evidence. I'd have sworn that second day that he was the one, that his quietness was guilt, that his watchfulness was a predator's. He was none of it. He was just new and quiet, and unlucky enough to be the stranger when a guard went looking for a villain. And the kitchen child. I watched a kitchen child that second day, a small girl the right size for the footprints, and I built a story where she was the small hand in the passages, the accomplice, the tool, and I watched her with the cold eye of a man who's decided a child might be his enemy, and the shame of that has never left me. She was playing. She was a kitchen child playing in a yard, and I stood and watched her with suspicion in my heart, ready to name her to the machine, and if I'd raised the alarm with her name in it, that child's whole family would have been taken and questioned and broken on nothing, on my fear's bad arithmetic, and she'd have carried it her whole life, the time the guard's suspicion fell on her and destroyed her family. I came that close to doing it. The only thing that stopped me was the half-finished envelope in the passage and the child's hand on it, the crack in my story that came just in time, the night before I'd have taken my suspects to the machine. One more day of being wrong and I'd have fed innocence to the Crown's hard questioning. I think about that, how close the wrong story ran to doing real harm, how fear-hunting a villain will always find one among the innocent if you let it hunt long enough, and how the only thing that saved the innocent in this case was that the truth happened to surface before my fear finished building its case. It doesn't always surface in time. That's the thing that keeps me up, even now. How often does the fear finish its case first, and an innocent hangs and the truth surfaces a day too late, or never? I got lucky. The truth came up the night before I'd have done the harm. The understeward and the kitchen child never knew how close my fear came to ruining them. I knew. I've carried it. It's part of why I tell this. So the next guard who finds a black envelope and feels the fear start building its list of the usual suspects will maybe wait one more night before he feeds the innocent to the machine. The half-finished envelope, the moment the whole story turned over in my hands. I have to give one moment its own space, because it's the hinge of the whole thing. The finding of the second envelope, the half-finished one in the passage. It was the second night deep in, when I'd nearly convinced myself of a conspiracy, when my suspect list was full and my fear was sure. And I found it on the passage floor, dropped, abandoned, a black paper half darkened. The pale writing started and broken off in the middle of a word, as if the writer had lost their nerve or run out of something or simply couldn't go on. And I picked it up, still inside my conspiracy story, and I tried to fit it into the story, a clue, dropped by the accomplice, careless. But it wouldn't fit. A conspiracy doesn't make half a threat and drop it. A conspiracy doesn't lose its nerve mid-word. Only a person loses their nerve mid-word. Only a small, uncertain, frightened person starts a terrible message and can't finish it and drops it in the dark and runs. The half-finishedness of it was the most human thing I'd found, and the humanness of it was exactly what couldn't fit my conspiracy. And that's the moment, holding that broken-off half-thread in the cold passage, that I felt the whole story I'd built begin to come apart. Because I looked at the writing properly then, the way I told you, and saw it was a child's hand, and I'd known the small footprints were a child's, and now here was a child's hand making a threat and losing its nerve halfway through, and the two facts together, a child writing threats, a child who couldn't even finish one, would not assemble into any villain. They assembled into something else, something I didn't want, something my fear had no shape for, and I stood there feeling my certainty drain out and a colder, different understanding seep in. The understanding that I'd been hunting a monster and there was no monster, that the trail led not to an enemy but to a child, and that the child was making threats against a princess who, and here the floor truly dropped, who might be the same child, because the footprints came and went from the princess's own room. And a child who threatens from inside the princess's own room using the princess's own secret passages might not be threatening the princess at all, might be the princess. And the moment that thought arrived, fully, in the cold dark with the half-finished envelope in my hand, I had to put my back against the passage wall and just breathe, because the most frightening message in the palace had just become the saddest, and I knew, before I'd even found her, that the trail ended at a lonely child writing terror to summon love. And there is no training for that, no drill, no protocol. Nothing in 20 years of guarding had prepared me for the moment a threat turned, in my hands, into a child's broken cry. And I have never been the same guard since, or the same man. I followed the small feet to the truth on the third night, and the truth was the princess herself. I should have known sooner. I see that now. The small feet came and went from her room because they were hers. The passages were hers. She'd found the door behind the tapestry. A curious child in a lonely wing finds every door eventually, and she'd been going into the walls, into the secret veins of the old keep, alone in the nights. A 6-year-old wandering the hidden passages of a palace while the guard who was supposed to watch her walked his rounds past an empty bed and never knew, because I checked the bed early in the watch and she was there asleep. And by the time I'd have checked again, she was back. And the room was watched, but the wall was not. And a small girl had been living a whole secret life in the bones of the palace, while I guarded her door against a world that was never the threat. And the envelopes, the black envelopes, the terrifying messages, the pale ink, she wrote them. The princess wrote them and put them under her own pillow for me to find. That's the truth at the end of the trail, the truth my fear could never have reached, the truth that turned the most frightening thing I'd ever held into the saddest. A 6-year-old wrote threats against herself, in her own small hand made fearsome as she could make it, and hid them under her own pillow where the night guard would find them. And I have spent the rest of my life understanding why. And I'll tell you why, because it's the whole of what this story is for. She wrote them because a threat was the only thing that would make anyone come. I have to tell you about the wing, the real wing, not the safe, quiet wing I'd been so proud to guard. It was safe, yes. It was also lonely. The Princess Rena was the youngest, far younger than her brothers, born late to a king and queen who were old in their cares and consumed by them. A kingdom at the edge of a war, a court full of crises, parents who loved her, I believe they loved her, but who were always elsewhere, always pulled away, who saw her in the managed scraps of time the great give their children, a kiss at a doorway, a few minutes before some council, and then gone. She was raised by nurses who came and went, by the apparatus of the wing, loved in the abstract by a kingdom, and in the particular by almost no one with the time to show it. She was a small, lonely child in a safe, quiet wing, and she had learned the thing lonely children learn, the thing that breaks your heart when you finally see it, that her ordinary needs, her fear of the dark, her loneliness, her wanting someone to come when she called, were not enough to make anyone come. The wing was too well run. Her small, ordinary sorrow slid off its smooth surface. A child who is fine, who is safe, who is provided for, is a child the busy world can safely not come to. And she'd learned she was that child, the safely not come to child, and it was killing something in her by inches. And she'd worked out, 6 years old in the dark alone, she'd worked out the terrible logic of it, that there was one thing that would make them come. Danger, a threat. If she were merely lonely, no one came. But if she were in danger, the whole world would come running, the guards, the nurses, her parents, everyone, all the attention and presence, and coming running that her loneliness could never summon. So she manufactured the danger. She made herself a threat to be saved from, because being saved from a danger was the only way she could think of to get the one thing she actually needed, which was for someone to come, to be frightened for her, to hold her because she mattered enough to be frightened for. The black envelopes weren't threats. They were the most desperate possible call for help, disguised as the only thing a palace takes seriously. She'd learned that her love need would be ignored and her danger need would be answered. And so she dressed her love need as a danger and slid it under her pillow and waited for someone to come. And I came. That's the thing. The plan worked. A guard found the envelope and was frightened and came, except the guard, instead of bringing the running world she'd hoped for, had taken the envelope quietly into the corridor and gone hunting a villain, and so even her manufactured danger had failed to bring the coming running, had been intercepted by a careful guard who took it away to investigate instead of raising the cry that would have brought everyone. She'd made the only call she knew how to make, and even that had been quietly absorbed by the smooth machine of the wing. No wonder there was a second envelope, half-finished, abandoned in the passage. She was trying again. She was trying harder. A child escalating her own cry for help because the first cry had been too quietly handled, and the escalation would have gone on, would have grown, until either it finally broke through or until she'd frightened herself past what a 6-year-old can hold, alone in the dark, in the walls. The night I found her slowed all the way down because it's the heart of everything. I gave you the finding of her fast, and it deserves slow, because it's the center of the whole thing, the moment the mystery became a child. She was deep in the passages, in a little widened place where two veins of the old keep met, a kind of small stone room that I think she'd made her own. There were things there, when my torch found them, small things, a worn toy, a stub of candle, a little hoard of the kind a child makes in a secret place. And it broke my heart before I even saw her face, that hoard, because it told me she'd been coming here a long time, that she had a whole secret life down here in the cold, dark bones of the palace. A life she'd built alone because the life upstairs had no room in it for her. And then the torch found her. Small in her night clothes, cold. She must have been so cold down there night after night with the stub of chalk and the black paper, looking up at the light with a face that went through fear. Then a strange resignation, the face of a child caught, who expects the caught nest to go badly, who has learned that being found by adults usually means being managed, scolded, handled. And I did the thing I'm most glad of in my whole life. I didn't raise the torch like an accusation. I didn't speak hard. I lowered myself down, an old man in armor, in a space too small for it, lowering himself to the cold floor with all the awkward slowness of age, and I sat. Near her, not too near, the way you approach a frightened animal, and I didn't say anything about the envelopes, didn't say anything at all for a long while. Just sat with her in the cold and let her see that the adult who'd found her wasn't going to manage her, wasn't in a hurry, wasn't going to do any of the things adults did. And I watched her wait for the scolding that didn't come, watched her brace for the handling that didn't come, and watched, slowly, the bracing leave her, watched a 6-year-old slowly understand that someone had come into her secret cold place and was just going to be there with her gladly for no reason. And when she finally spoke, I won't tell you what she said, it's hers. When she finally spoke, it wasn't about the envelopes either. It was something small and ordinary, a child's remark. The kind a child makes to someone they've decided is safe. And that small, ordinary remark was the whole victory, was the sound of a lonely child deciding that the person who'd come was someone she could just be ordinary with, which is the thing she'd been starving for. An ordinary moment with someone in no hurry to leave. We sat in the passage a long time, that first night, the old guard and the small princess in the cold with her little hoard around us. And I didn't fix anything and didn't report anything and didn't solve anything. I just stayed. And the staying was the solving. The staying was the whole answer to the terrible mystery. And I understood, sitting there, that I'd spent 3 nights and nearly ruined innocent lives hunting for the answer to a question whose answer was simply, stay. Come and stay. That's all it ever was. The most frightening message in the palace, decoded at last, said only, "Please someone come and stay," and someone had, and it was enough. I felt it be enough, in the cold passage, felt the thing in her that had been so tight begin to loosen, and I knew the envelopes would stop, because the thing they'd been calling for had finally come. I found her in the passages on the third night. Awake, out of her bed, small in the dark with a stub of pale chalk in her hand, and a black paper she'd made herself from God knows where, sitting in a cold stone vein of the old keep, writing another terrible message to summon the world that wouldn't come for anything less than terror. And I had a choice, my third and last and most important choice of the whole affair, the one the first two had been leading to all along. I could do the trained thing even now. Take her back, report it, let the truth come out, the strange, sad truth, the princess who threatened herself, and the machine would have handled it, would have brought physicians who speak of disordered minds, would have made it a thing wrong with her, a problem to be managed, more nurses, more watching, more of the smooth handling that had made her so lonely she'd resorted to this. The truth, told to the machine, would have become one more way to handle her, and the handling was the disease. Or I could do the thing the off feeling had been pushing me toward since the first cold moment in the corridor, the thing that wasn't trained, wasn't proper, wasn't a guard's to do. I could understand her. I could see, kneeling there in the cold passage in front of a 6-year-old caught writing threats against herself, that this child did not need to be handled, did not need to be reported or managed or physicked. She needed someone to come. That was the whole of it. The entire elaborate, frightening mystery I'd spent 3 nights unraveling resolved into the simplest need there is. A child needed someone to come and be glad to find her and not be in a hurry to be elsewhere. So I did that. I knelt down in the cold passage and I didn't scold her and I didn't report her. I came. I sat down in the dark next to a 6-year-old who'd been so unmet she'd invented a kidnapper to summon company. And I stayed, and I was in no hurry. And I let her see that someone had come, finally, not because she was in danger, but just because she was there, just because she was worth coming to. And I felt her small body, which had been braced like a frightened animal's, slowly let go of the bracing, the way a child lets go when the coming running finally comes. I didn't raise the alarm. I never did. I want that on the record, the choice I made and would make again. I never told the machine the truth of the black envelopes. I told them I had to tell them something. An envelope had been found. The off feeling could only cover so much. I told them I'd investigated and found it was a prank, a servant's child playing at frightening, dealt with, no threat, no further concern. A lie. I lied to the crown about a threat to a princess, which is its own kind of treason, and I did it to keep the machine off the child, to keep her strange, sad cry for help from becoming a thing wrong with her that more handling would be brought to fix. I took the whole weight of it onto myself, the lie and the knowing, so that she wouldn't have to carry being the girl who threatened herself, so that her cry for help wouldn't be turned, by the smooth machine, into one more proof that she was a problem to be managed at a distance. And then I did the only thing I could actually do about the real problem, which wasn't a guard's to solve and which I tried to solve anyway in the small ways available to me. I came. Every night after on my watch, I came, not just past her door but in, quietly, a few minutes just to be a person who came, who was glad to see her, who wasn't in a hurry. I couldn't give her her parents, that wasn't mine to give. I couldn't make the busy world slow down for a lonely child. I was one old night guard with no power over any of it. But I could come myself, those few minutes a night, and let one person in her world be someone who came for no reason but her. And I did for years, until she was older and the loneliness of the small child had grown into the different sturdier solitude of the older one. And she didn't need the night guard to come anymore, and that was its own small grief, being no longer needed, and a good one, the right kind, the kind you're glad of. The years of coming, what it cost, what it gave, the long quiet after. I came every night after on my watch for years, and I should tell you what that was, because it wasn't dramatic and the undramatic is the point. It was a few minutes, that's all. I couldn't do more. I had a watch to keep, rounds to walk, and a guard who spends his whole watch in one child's room is a guard not doing his job, and I wasn't going to fail the wing to save the one child. So it was a few minutes a night in the small hours, a quiet visit, sometimes a few words, sometimes nothing, sometimes just standing a moment by her bed so she'd know, half asleep, that someone had come, that the night held someone who came for her. A few minutes. It seems like nothing. It was everything, because it was reliable, because it was for her, because it asked nothing and managed nothing and just came. A child doesn't need hours. A child needs to know that someone comes, that she's worth coming to, that the night isn't empty of people who are glad she exists. I gave her a few minutes a night, and it was enough to stop the black envelopes forever, which tells you how little she'd actually needed all along, how small the thing was that the whole smooth machine of the wing had failed to give her. A few minutes a night of someone glad to come. It cost me something those years, though I'd never have called it a cost at the time. It cost me the risk, always there, that someone would notice the night guard visiting the princess's room, would build a wrong story about it the way I'd built wrong stories about the understeward, would see something ugly in an old man coming to a child's room in the dark. And I knew that risk, and I came anyway, because the child needed it more than I needed to be safe from the wrong story. Nothing ever came of it. The wing trusted me, and I was careful, and the visits were innocent as morning. But I carried the risk every night, the knowledge that a kindness can be made to look like its opposite, that an old man's mercy to a lonely child could be twisted by a suspicious eye into something vile. I came anyway. Some risks you carry because the alternative is to let a child go unmet to protect yourself, and I'd rather have carried the risk than been the guard who calculated his own safety over a lonely child's need. I'd seen where calculating your own safety over a child's need leads. It leads to black envelopes. I wasn't going to be one more adult whose caution left her alone. The lie I told the crown, the weight of it, since I keep saying I lied. I lied to the crown. I keep saying it, and I want to face it square, because it was the gravest thing I did, and I'd do it again, and you should understand both. When they asked, and they asked, an envelope had been found, the matter couldn't entirely vanish. I told them it was a servant's child's prank, investigated and dealt with no threat. A lie top to bottom. There was no servant's child. There was a princess crying for help in the only language she thought would be answered, and I hid that from the people who ruled her life because I judged, a night guard judging far above my station, that the truth would harm her more than the lie. That the crown told its princess had threatened herself, would not hear a cry for help, would hear a problem, a disorder, a thing wrong with the child, and would bring its handling to bear, more watchers, more physicians, more of the very managing that had starved her into the passages in the first place. I judged that the truth would be used against her, would become one more proof that she was difficult, needed managing, was a problem, and that the lie would protect her, would let her cry for help be answered quietly by me, by presence instead of loudly by the machine with handling. I had no right to make that judgment. A guard doesn't decide what the crown may know about its own child. I decided anyway, and I lied, and I took the whole weight of the lie onto myself, the treason of it, the risk that it would come out and I'd hang for having concealed a threat to a princess, because better I carry that risk than she carry the truth's consequences. I never regretted it. The envelope stopped. The child healed. The lie protected the healing. If they'd known the truth, they'd have managed her, and the managing would have confirmed everything her loneliness had taught her, that she was a problem to be handled at a distance and never simply a child to be come to. I lied so that she could be, for a few minutes a night, simply a child someone came to, instead of forever a case the machine was managing. I'd tell that lie 100 times. It's the best thing I ever did with my mouth, that lie, the most loyal disloyal thing, the treason that was the truest service. The crown would say I betrayed it. I'd say I served the only part of the crown that mattered, which was a cold, lonely 6-year-old in the bones of the keep, and I served her with a lie because the truth would have been turned into a weapon against her. And a guard's whole purpose is to put himself between the vulnerable and the weapon, even when the weapon is the truth, and the one wielding it is the crown itself. She never wrote another envelope. That's how I knew it had worked, the only proof I ever got that the coming had been the answer. The black envelope stopped the moment someone started actually coming. She hadn't wanted to frighten anyone. She'd wanted someone to come, and once someone came, the terrible disguised cry was no longer needed. And it stopped, as simply as that. The most frightening mystery in the palace ending not with an arrest or a hanging or a sealed wing, but with an old guard sitting in the dark, a few minutes a night with a child who'd only ever needed to be come to. The whole machinery of fear I might have unleashed, the suspects, the questioning, the broken innocence, none of it, because the answer to the black envelope was never force. The answer was presence. The most terrifying message in the palace needed, as its entire solution, one person willing to come and not hurry away. You'll want to know whether her parents ever woke up, whether the king and queen ever became the ones who came, whether the loneliness was solved at its root. And the honest answer is the hard one. Mostly, no. I'd be lying if I gave you the tidy ending where the parents learned their lesson and the family healed. They didn't, not really, not because they were cruel, but because they were caught, the way the great are caught, in the machinery of their cares, the war at the border, the council, the 1,000 crises that eat a ruler's hours and leave the scraps for the children. They went on loving her in the abstract and being mostly absent in the particular, the kiss at the doorway, the few minutes before the council, the gone again. The root of her loneliness, which was the unmetness at the heart of her family, I could not touch. It wasn't mine to touch. I was a night guard. I couldn't make a king slow down or a queen come home from her cares. The root stayed. What I could do, what I did, was smaller and it was real. I couldn't fill the hole, but I could keep her from falling all the way into it. I couldn't be her parents, but I could be one reliable person who came. And one reliable person who comes is not enough to heal the root, but it's enough to keep a child from breaking, enough to teach her that being met is possible even if it's rare, enough to hold her together through the years, until she was old enough to build her own ways of being met, her own friendships, her own life past the lonely wing. That's the honest shape of what I did. I didn't fix her family. I held a child through the damage her family couldn't help doing until she was strong enough to carry it herself. It's not the tidy ending. It's the true one. Most of the real good we do in this world is that shape, not fixing the root, which is usually past our power, but being the one reliable presence that keeps someone from breaking while the root goes unfixed, holding them through it until they can hold themselves. I held her through it. The black envelope stopped not because her family changed, but because one person came reliably enough to make the crying out unnecessary. That's a smaller victory than healing her whole world. It's the victory that was actually available to me, and I took it. And it was enough to make the difference between a child who broke and a child who didn't. And a guard doesn't get to fix the world. A guard gets to stand between one vulnerable person and the harm. And that's what I did, against a harm I'd never been trained to see, with the only weapon that worked against it, which was just to come. She's grown now. A woman and a good one, not a queen. She was too far down the line for that, but a person of the court, and I've watched her from my distance become the thing that the rescued sometimes become, the one who comes. She's known in the court for it, for noticing the overlooked, for coming to the lonely, for slowing down for the children and the servants and the small, unmet people the great sweep past. They think it's natural sweetness. The court does, a lady's kind nature. I know what it is. It's a girl who was so unmet she invented a kidnapper to summon company, grown into a woman who makes very sure no one near her is ever that unmet, who comes, who is never too busy, who learned in the cold passages of the old keep exactly how much it costs a child to be safely not come to, and spends her life making sure the children near her are come to. The black envelopes made her, in the end, not the way she meant. She wrote them to summon one person, and instead they grew her into a person who summons herself to everyone forever. That's the only happy ending I know how to give you, and it's a true one. The lonely child became the one who comes. I'm old now, past the watch, past everything, and I've told almost no one this because it was hers, the truth, the strange, sad truth, and not mine to spend. But I'm at the end, and I find I don't want it to die with me. The real story of the black envelope, because the world that hears, a guard found a terrifying message under a princess's pillow, will imagine villains and plots and a brave guard foiling them. And the truth is so much smaller and so much more important than that. The truth is that the most frightening thing I ever found in a palace was a lonely child's cry for help, and that the answer to it was not a sword or an alarm or the machine. The answer was a man kneeling down in the dark and being in no hurry to leave. That's the whole of what I learned in 50 years of guarding. The threats that come from outside, the gates and the walls and the alarms, those are the easy ones. Those we're trained for. The threat I never trained for, the one that nearly broke a child right under my nose in the safest wing of the palace, was loneliness, was a small person safely not come to, and the only weapon that ever worked against it was the cheapest and rarest one there is, which is to come and to stay and to not be in a hurry. Guard the gates, yes. But watch the quiet, safe places too, the wings where nothing ever happens, because that's where the loneliness lives, and loneliness in a child is a threat as real as any blade, and the black envelope under the pillow might not be the enemy's message at all. It might be the child herself, calling in the only language she thinks you'll answer. Answer it. Not with the machine, with yourself. Come and stay and don't hurry. It's the whole of what I have to leave you, and it saved a child once. And it's truer than any song they'll sing about guards and gates and terrifying messages in the dark. Talon of the Night Watch, Kingdom of Corvith, who found the most frightening thing in the palace and learned it was only a child who needed someone to come. She's well now. Someone came. It was enough. It's always in the end the only thing that's enough.